Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to start the first panel, which is called Steppe, the cultural and natural heritage during the time of war. I'm a little worried. Why? Because I was born in Melitopol, Zaporizhia region, and those landscapes are really familiar and really close to me. All my childhood is connected with them. Today, we're going to talk about the restoration, about getting back those landscapes. I'm very happy to present our speakers. So Alexei Vasilyuk, ecologist, zoologist, environmentalist, and public figure, head and co-founder of the public organization Ukrainian Nature Conversation Group. Andrei Lutsik, an architect, expert on cultural heritage protection from the Regional Center for Human Rights, Kherson. And Yulia Manukyan, she is a curator of art and urban projects, a journalist. She's also from Kherson, and right now she lives in Odessa. I would like to start this conversation with saying that yesterday we were talking with my friend who's living in New Zealand, and she was trying to explain me. She says, Ukraine looks at nature like resource. We have black lands and black soils, and we also grow something. And I live now in the culture where nature perceives very differently, and it's difficult to understand at the very beginning. And I was thinking about that, and we were talking about the big valley also that is coming back because of the natural disaster, because of the disaster that happened there. And sometimes we're thinking about land as something that we can use, but maybe we should think about new forms of coexistence, as well as we are trying to find the forms of coexistence with people who come from war, and we're trying to make them objects of some policies instead of just trying to coexist. And I suggest that we think, how do we coexist with the other landscapes affected by war, newly found, restored, or destroyed. So the landscape that existed before the times when the great water reservoir was created comes back. What do we do with this landscape? What kind of coexistence it can be? Hello, everyone. Let me start with saying something different. So, civil society organizations, Ukrainian Nature Conservation Group is the organization of professional biologists, and we want to apply our professional knowledge in order to make sure that nature in Ukraine is protected at the state level. So we have people from different places in Ukraine, but most of the people are from Kherson region, and I'm not from Kherson, and it's a bit weird that I'm here instead of them today, but it's a very important conversation for me as well. Going back to the Great Valley, this panel today and all the exhibition is like the main theme is expansion of nature into the nature. And indeed, Kherson region and this terms illustrates it very well, because up till certain time it was a region where people and nature coexisted very well, but at certain moment it all changed. And when the water reservoir construction started, because before that life was different. There was back a time when there was no water reservoir and people were living there somehow, but Soviet Union decided to flood the lands and make the huge water reservoir. It's very well known that in the German colonists were exploring a lot the south of Ukraine Now we only know about the Felton family that who built a Scania Nova Natural Reserve, but there were a lot of other families and explorers, and this was the activity that was closer to the nature. They mostly did cutlery, and Kherson region is a steppe climatic zone. You can do a lot of things there, but climatically it will still stay steppe. Steppe is predominantly grass. It's very windy, it's very dry, and from Baikal to Dunai we have a very strong dry wind, and only very powerful cyclones can get through it, and if it ever rains in steppe, it's a very heavy rain. And in such conditions there are a lot of wildfires. That's why only grass survives, and the biggest lively mass is under the ground when we're talking about the grass. And forests, they have most of the lively mass above the ground. In order for steppe to live, there should be cows and other cutlery that eat the grass, or the grass should be cut at the steppe. And back then there were a lot of that. And actually cutlery, like at some moment, Soviet Union won the Second World War somehow, and it was very exhausted, and Stalin decided that we have to restore our military power after the Second World War, and in order to produce the gunpowder they needed a lot of cotton, because the gunpowder is being done from the cotton. And the cotton ministry was created, and everywhere in the steppe the cotton was planted. All the republics were forced to grow cotton, and in Ukraine they started to build the hydro junction to irrigate the cotton. So all this huge irrigation system was a part of the cotton industry. Nobody is talking about it. They say like it was done for the energy, for agriculture, but no, it was all for growing cotton. So Stalin died, and Khrushchev made a deal for importing cotton from Egypt. The water reservoir was filled in with the water, and the irrigation started. The aim of all this huge thing was no longer needed, and it turned out that Ukrainian Soviet Socialistic Republic and then Ukraine later received a huge technological object. And it happened that we have got something that was never used as to its initial purpose, and now everyone says that you can only grow something with the irrigation in the south of Ukraine, but actually it has never been so. This irrigation system was actually never used for the purpose it was built for. And when the terrorist attack happened, I don't want to decrease the harm it caused. The harm is not that the territory is transforming. The harm was that was done by the big water that came from Kherson region, the water that flooded into the sea and also damaged the seashore. Ukrainian nation never had more damage in its history, probably, but it was a very short action. And now there is a long-term consequences. So this territory, the young forest is now growing on this territory. The young forest, as it looked before the flooding, So the types of trees are growing there is the most climatic sustainable type of forests because they do not burn very well. I never were on the expeditions of the restoration of the Great Valley. I see my colleagues taking pictures at the background of the young trees, but I don't think any territory had such experience in the modern world. Like, imagine, the poplars of height of 3 meters can grow in a couple of years, but it's true. Like, the nature had the mechanism of what to do if this big water reservoir is no longer there. If there wouldn't have been the water reservoir, there would be yearly flooding, and we're not talking only about Kherson, but in this part of the planet. It's not tropical or subtropical climate. We have seasons, and when the water goes away after the natural flooding, the poplars start to give their seeds, and its seeds on the soil, on the wet soil. No one planned that, but now this trees are planted with this, all the territory is planted with this trees. There were waves of this seeds, wave by wave. They would stay there. Poplars and willows. And it happens so that this flood, the water that stays usually during the natural flood for a couple of months, stayed there for 60-70 years. But now let's imagine it went away, and now it looks like a forest of microgreen that we grow at our balcony when it's 1 square meter there are like 60 to 90 young trees. This is not the forest, it will not stay like this. And now we know that it is possible. We know that the trees can rise up to 6 meters in 2 years, and the terms of growth are really fascinating, and we are really curious how nature copes with it. What is the mechanism of the nature to leave 1 tree out of 200 to make sure there is a forest? We don't know what is the mechanism. No one in our lifetime have never seen this area without the water reservoir. We'll see how it happens. Yes. So now there is a lot of discussion whether we should restore the water reservoir or the nature as it was before. And if we could have this discussion with different positions, so there would be a lot of discussions about economy. And the thing is that when this cotton cultivation was planned and irrigation system was planned, nobody thought that all the south of Ukraine is the bottom of the sea that used to be there once, and there is a lot of salt underneath. The water goes into the Dnieper River, it gets evaporated, and it's the latest reservoir. There is a salty water. The water gets evaporated, the salt stays there, and when we irrigate with salty water. It's a very bad scenario, and it gets the soil even more salty. For another 15-20 years we could continue, but then the soil would become too salty to seed something there. Now we have a chance, one of their variant, to create the new barrage and new water reservoir to spend 15-20 years to make sure it's filled in, and then to irrigate it for another 20 years and then abandon this territory. Or we can use another scenario, any scenario apart from irrigation, and economically wise, I think it will be more sustainable. And I'm also interested in good economy in Ukraine, long-term sustainable economical growth, and I just want to convey the idea that those people who advocate for a Great Valley as a natural territory, they also support the position of long-term sustainable economy. They do not say, no, we don't need anything there, because people say, oh, you want to go back to Stone Age. No, we want to have a long-term sustainable economy. Thank you. Thank you very much. I am really want to talk to Yulia and Andriy, but I will continue with Andriy because we were talking about spaces where people and nature should coexist, and this metaphor of getting back to the space. And maybe people, the generations of people who never saw this great valley, they're not ready for it because they got used to interact with the space differently. And maybe we will have to find another ways of interaction. So these new spaces where people and nature can coexist, how do you see them in this frontierness? Because Kherson region will stay the territory that will be on the frontier at the side of this stable threat. So how will it look like? First of all, I wouldn't make any conclusions right now, any precise conclusions at least, about the role of Kherson region after the war conflict ends, because there are different possible scenarios, and when we are talking about our future, we have to think about these scenarios. And it's a bit different type of conversation. It happens so ironically, and it's a bit sad that Kherson now plays the role it was created for initially. Kherson was created at the place of the fortress, and it has become fortress. Kherson and Borislav, they are the fortress of the riverbank, and if we hadn't have the city there, it would simplify the military force to move on. So Kherson has become a fortress, but fortress is not a city; it's a different function. City fortress can exist, but when the fortress performs its function, the functioning of it as a city is very limited and very temporary. So we may try to look at the experience of Balkan Wars, Sarajevo, and survival of people or in the siege or near the front line, but each space is very different. People got used to danger, but any person has certain certain limit of resilience.
One way or another, the community of people in the city can show various types of heroism, and it can be social, it can be economic, but the city, one way or another, will exist. If we speak about the future of Kherson, we need to think about the end of the war, and we need to base our plans on what it's going to be like. In the context of the economy, when it comes to the dam. The dam was one of the industrial projects back in the USSR. Now the times are different. It is not necessary to have a dam to ensure irrigation in the areas that are there. Another question to answer is the population that we will have there. Do we need the amount of irrigation that we had for the quantity of population that we are going to have? This is an issue of strategic analysis, of economic planning on the national and regional levels. And before we speak about rebuilding the dam, we need to have a stable situation to conduct monitoring and analysis of the resources that we have. And only then should we conclude whether we need a water reservoir or we should rather use other economic models to rebuild the region. And if we speak about what is happening now, we see that even in this wounded fortress city, people cling to their survival, to the lifestyle they used to have. We know that people started somehow building pipelines to have water supply. They are doing a lot of grassroots things. Do you see new practices in the region that something new could develop from? Well, I recently talked to my acquaintances from Stanislav, and I asked them about their routine, about their everyday life. They shared that they divided into groups with walkie-talkies, with radio electronic means to suppress drones. They have guns to hunt the drones when they see them. They have call signs, and they keep doing agriculture and maintaining their life. You can have different attitudes to this, but their life is becoming quite close to the life of soldiers on the front line. This is something that brings us back to the concept of a fortress, because life in the city is very similar to the routine that servicemen and women have. So that's the thing. Thank you. I will come back to you. I wanted to talk to Julia as well. I was thinking for a long time about this cultural component of life in Kherson and in the region. Actually, I lived in Crimea for a long time. I studied Crimean cities, and we have the wonderful city Bilohirsk, which had the historic name of Kretsu Bazar, which we were almost successful bringing back, and was the center of Crimean Tatar statehood for a certain time. It was a state capital, an economic capital, but after the deportation of Crimean Tatars, this was a city that still had over 26 mosques, very characteristic architecture, but it was all destroyed. People were moved out of there, and when they started bringing in people from other parts of Ukraine, also from Russia and Belarus, after the deportation, people saw this very Soviet city because everything else was destroyed. In the 90s, Crimean Tatars came back, and they remembered what the city was like, what it looked like. And when we were studying the city, like Italo Calvino was describing. People were walking there, and everyone was walking through their own streets, and everyone walked through their own architecture, because a lot of Crimean Tatars remembered what the city used to be like, while many other people who were relocated there, they didn't understand what it was about, and there was this conflict there. So when we speak about culture, I know that you have a project where you try to recover the lost heritage of the Kherson region. What challenges do you encounter? Well, of course, there are a lot of challenges. I thought we would start working on the subject like step by step with lyrical memories, because Zerman really brought back a lot of memories for me. And I have this social skill of speaking about tragedy with a bit of irony. But this is a really interesting story, because back then there was the dry law, there was the no drinking order during the first weeks of the occupation, and when somebody starts taking something away from you, you start fighting back. So we started hunting any kind of alcohol just on principle. I was there with Mdotatenko's wife because we already had the idea to record this reality. The art residence in occupation was already working, one which I organized, and we were walking. We saw that Semen Hromtsov, a close friend of Vyacheslav Mystetskyi, the head of the Modern Art Museum, he was very happy, and he had a lot of bottles surrounding him. We were asking how, and he said, "You won't believe this. They were selling milk here, and when I came in, they whispered to me, 'Do you want beer?'" So he got a lot of those bottles, and we were happy visiting their family home, and it was our first alcohol there. And it was a happy day when we were all together, and we felt better for a second, and we had this slightly optimistic mood. This is about things that you remember just as well as some tragic things. As for Novorossovka, I am a person who was there twice with an expedition. We are currently working in Odessa, so we went there with Odessa artists. Then we took the Semen Hromtsov and Yulia Logacheva, our Kherson artists, there. We looked at that forest because it's an important part of the Great Meadow. And for those who don't know, before the catastrophe with the dam, one of the streets was just cut off by the water reservoir. And the current head of the military administration, who is also a volunteer, an activist, a historian, a reconstruction expert, would dive in there and collect artifacts from those flooded territories, and he had this really cool collection. So we had the idea of creating a museum of the flooded Great Meadow, and he still has all those artifacts. Now we are creating a project, the second project, that is dedicated to this heritage of the Kherson region that is lost or being lost. Of course, including the towns and villages from that area, because unfortunately almost all the recovery programs, even ones established by foreign experts, are absolutely not interested in recovering the heritage. The government honestly always ignored it, and my colleague Sridichenko could share a lot of sad things. When thousands of important and worthy objects are not included, like only 3 of them are included into the protected heritage list. we work with artists as a regular practice because we started doing that back in 2016 when our organization started. And we believe that modern artists help us connect this memory, this historic nature with today. They create a bridge to this heritage, these ruins that may be not very interesting for young people. They are building this bridge, they are adding their reflections, their angles. This is important for the residents themselves. By the way, speaking about challenges, I am a very urban person, and when he suggested that I and Mystetskyi go and monitor regional museums, for me it was something, absolutely ununderstandable, because there was already the Museum of Modern Art. We were in our own urban postmodern bubble. We were looking at all those rural areas as something very quaint and wild and dark. So I was slightly snobbish about this. I was a person who ignored this culture because I wasn't interested in it. But we had this project. We had to work with these regional museums, and that was the first time when we got Novorontovka, when we saw what it was like, when we saw the water reservoir, learned this whole story. And as a result, I had this shift in my worldview, because I saw very different things, and I saw very dedicated people who were sitting there, and different people, of course, but I saw people who were very enthusiastic. Then the law on decommunization went into effect, and people were devastated because the Soviet pattern of working with heritage was really deeply built into their mindset. But the workers, leaders themselves knew that they had to change something, but they didn't know how. So having these new museum theories, we went like on a mission to teach them. I would say that my perception of a village as something that is completely unintellectual was completely destroyed. Basically, will remind you what a village that was when the museum head was doing things in a very novel way, because she removed all the Soviet writing and replaced it with quotes by philosophers. I was very impressed because can you remember this was this rural museum, and they replaced Lenin with Foucault. Well, there was a lot of Nietzsche there, because Nietzsche is very universal, as you understand. And Nietzsche is very good for times of catastrophe. I was very impressed because she didn't remove those controversial items. There was actually a very scary story there, because the Kherson Oblast Directorate of Culture issued the order to do decommunization in 2 months before Independence Day. Can you imagine the despair? People were just completely lost whether they should remove the Aurora worship or not. We actually invited Olesya to instruct people, to help people reinterpret the museum heritage. You cannot move those periods anywhere. The bad thing was that over the years of existence of Ukraine as an independent country, there was no practice to get together museum workers. There was no practice to go to the neighboring city or town or village to learn something new. People met each other at a training, and I actually climbed down from the ladder of my snobbishness, and I started looking these people in a different way. Because we did have a lot of problems in our museums as well. But the fact that people were so so interested in their things, so passionate about their work. I have a lot of experience traveling to different museums, and I will tell you that if a community has an enthusiastic person, the museum will function. If the community is not interested, no matter what budget funds are put in there, the museum will not function. This can be a room in a school, it can be a separate building, doesn't matter, because it was always up to enthusiasts. We were supported by Europe and Austria, European Heritage Hour is supported by the Swedish Institute. They're all very empathetic and they all understand why we are fighting for all of these things, because now every minute something is shelled and destroyed and some things are ruined for good. But when you work on heritage in the Kherson region, you gain a certain philosophical attitude of this. We actually had these thoughts like, what can a modern artist do in villages? But this experience turned out very successful because the artist was much more empathetic than I was, and he created a wonderful art book with feedback, and there was a phrase that became a motto for me for the whole life. He said that everything is blown off by the wind in the steppe. Museums, steppe eats at everything. It eats us. It consumes our enemy. It consumes everything, and nothing material may stay. But we are witnesses of something. And this subject of a steppe, this ambivalence, which is something we started with, that tragedy and vitality go hand in hand. We are sad, we are very exhausted. A few days ago, my home burned down. I am in the area of the river port, and it was actually a miracle that it stayed there for so long. I grieved a bit, but then I calmed down because loss of life is much more important. I couldn't think about this because I had much more important things, and my home is nothing compared to the tragedy of other people. But I remember our urban projects, our wonderful project of urban modernism that was created during the pandemic, and I still remember how it worked, so I remain a fan of Kherson. When we speak about modernism and modernist heritage, we wanted to step away from the concept of Soviet modernism, because it was not only Soviet modernism that we had, and now I think there are so many layers, there is so much significance. I tend to separate urban and rural culture, and I don't like it when people perceive Kherson and the region as the city of tomatoes and watermelons. We wrote an enormous article about the region, about the Greek gods and heroes, Demeter, Hecate. Kherson has so many ties with the global culture, particularly with European culture. I will speak about this all the time. So sometimes I am very irritated by this obsession of agriculture. Going back to Novorentsovka, it is shelled now, but not not as much as sometimes. And when there was a ceasefire, because of course we were all very tense, but they looked, and of course, despite all the wonderful things in Novorentsovka, everyone was impressed by the forest. It is such a big challenge, and this is such a big fuck you, sorry for my French, to them, to the enemy, because it's such an optimistic moment among all these losses and among this whole herbicide, ecocide, these losses of culture, urban and rural culture and nature. And it's so impressive that for me, like, everyone was impressed. You know, you cannot even say this when you see the birth of a new ecosystem, when there had to be a toxic desert.
So there is no division right now, city, village, nature, it's all interconnected. And the losses give us this interconnection. And you want to see it. So the restoration should happen in all these areas, heritage, our cities that are now rethinking the paradigm of security. In 2022 I get to Germany, and the part of this residence was in Halle. It's a post-industrial city, and we reshaped the topic because we were not only thinking about public art and how to make the cities fun, but we were thinking about security and safety, and it will change the urbanism. I read recently the documents of the European Union and how they are looking at it, and they started considering the cities where all the buildings are created in order to make the population the life shield. We have to do something about it. If there is a close fight, close battle, the population is not protected. You can use them easily in order to move forward and to get your targets. So what happened in 2022 shifted Europe. It made them look at themselves. Herbicide, unfortunately, was not recognized. I was dealing with it in 2023-24, but there was no any criminal responsibility for the destruction of the city. And our situation also made the international institutions to think about it, because such level of destruction of cities in Europe has never happened since the Second World War. And Sergei Tichenko was reading a lecture to the prosecutor this morning about how to trace the museum objects that were stolen, because, you know, all this heritage was, a lot of heritage was stolen by Russia, but no one knows how to work with it, not mentioning this division that has to take care of has to cooperate with military personnel and somehow protect the objects. They give some recommendations during the shellings. They make sure that, like, if the trench is being done and they find an artifact, what to do, because at Stanislav Hills, when they were doing the trenches, it turned out they found a lot that archaeologists didn't manage to find, and we'd have to do something about that. But as far as I know, there is still no law, no decree on how to work with it. All the democratic armies have it, and their trainings. I understand that it can seem something very irrelevant, but it's our job and we have to talk about it. Thank you very much, Yulia. You covered a lot of topics in your reply. I want to refer to this part when you say that Steppe it's everything and we stay as witnesses of the story. I was talking to Timothy Snyder, and always we ask them, like, why are you studying Tripilya culture in Indo-Europeans if we need more researches about the story of our independence? He says, we keep forgetting that the story that happened with us yesterday is not as long as a story that happened with us like for 15,000 years. Sometimes something that was happening to us during the 50,000 years is more important than what happened yesterday, because it will have the consequences for our yesterday and our tomorrow. That's why I want to ask you a question, and I want to refer this question to Andrei as well. So this war reveals a lot, and a lot of things are being destroyed. It's not the first case when the museum funds are being stolen. We've seen it already during the Second World War, and even in Kherson, the same thing happens. So, what will remain from the story for the future of the whole region and their cities and villages? How do we build this narrative? Because it's a big polycultural world. There were Greeks, there were Germans, there were Polish people. It all can be lost. So how do you see this restoration of the can look like? How can this story be narrated? Yes, let me talk briefly. We are not working in the vacuum. We are finding people in different communities. Andrei Mystetskyi, who is the head of war administration, he's very ambitious. And if we're talking about Vorontsovka, he wants to create something there, because there are people, like about the 300 people, there are children, and he invited us to do the rebranding of the local museum. He wants to open an art school there. They want to make a cultural hub. But of course, this all should be based on the local heritage, but it's very connected with the modern culture. That's why we invite artists. But we have to work with community, because if a community needs it, it will make sense. If there are people in community and they don't move out and they connect their future with this village, something can be done. A museum remains a platform where people can talk about it, and museum become a cultural hub. Modern museums are more than just museums. The life goes on. There is a lot of activities. We're trying to do it interesting. For example, Technivka community, we're talking to local people, we're collecting the stories, but this village is very destroyed. Or Berislav, I was mentioning today. It's a tragedy for people who moved out. It's a tragedy for everyone. When we're talking to them, it's constant re-traumatization. And sometimes it's just unbearable. And artists from Odessa, of course, they're empathic and they suffer as well. But for them, it's the story of different land. It's less traumatic than for us. But we're collecting these testimonies, and we're able to find out a lot of things. Until we have the people who can tell the stories, we'll have the stories. No one ever asked them before about their land, and now we see that there's a lot of work to be done. We need to create the roadmap of this heritage, because a lot of things can be lost and they will not come back in any memories. But we started it back in 2016 to make this heritage visible, to make it interesting. I'm repeating myself, but just back then it was like a pilot project. We were just trying to do something, starting to do something. We said like, we will start something and people will continue, but no, without systematic work, it doesn't continue. Like, only the enthusiasts cannot cope with it, and without the state support, and we can talk a lot about the lack of state support, nothing will happen. But we're trying to support our people, but it's not enough. Again and again, we do not have access to the recovery programs. They all concentrated on the infrastructure, on housing, and when we're talking about the heritage, it turns out to be something irrelevant. And when you ask me, like, how do you see it, I hope that we will be able to collect the archive, all the cultural bubble. And by the way, we are the part of Timothy Snyder's program Documenting Ukraine, because we started documenting the destruction of heritage in the south of Ukraine, Odessa, Kherson, and Mykolaiv region. And we already have the huge archive. There are other people working in other regions. All this is done based on the support of international funds. How it will be integrated into the broader recovery program, I don't know. It's not a question to me. We will do our job. We will provide it. But whether it will become something compulsory, it's a question for the future. And 3, what is the experience of work with the community memory, with this heritage, which is very often is not included to their projects, recovery projects, because they are more about the infrastructure. Does the Ukraine have this experience? It's a sad experience, speaking of Ukraine. But generally speaking, if we could work with culture and cultural heritage at the national level, maybe we could even avoid this war. But going back to this conversation and to what we should do right now, I agree that we have to concentrate on people, on those who stayed there and those who left, and those who was never in Kherson but they have to know about it, because cultural heritage is being formed in the present. The thing we said a minute ago will become a cultural heritage. And what is happening right now with Kherson region and Kherson, it's the cultural heritage of the future, which will become the identity of future Khersonites. And these are the 3 directions of work we have to pay attention to. Thank you. I have a question to Alexei. The catastrophes happen in our country very often, unfortunately, and first very well-known catastrophe we're thinking of is Chernobyl catastrophe. And we see the decision that was taken. There is a natural preserve. The wildlife goes back there, like there are animals who live in quite a good condition. The population grow. Their population grow like it's a natural territory, and people almost don't live there. If we're talking about the restoration of the Great Meadow, with the understanding that a lot of lands are mined there right now, you as an environmental specialist, as a person who can understand the future of this land, how do you think, how many people can live there? What should be the logic of this life? Whether people have to live there or it should be the territory for vegetation and animals? What do you think about it? Yes, thank you. It's a very multi-layered question, because I have something to say about Chernobyl as well. But let me start from the end. The thing is, I really like those pictures. Unfortunately, I haven't seen this exhibition yet, but we can see this young forests and billions of young trees. Of course, most of them will die and the forest will be formed, but now there are like billions of trees. But we shouldn't forget, they all grow on a very polluted, contaminated area. It didn't go anywhere. For the growth of trees, like, it's okay, but to make a village there and to make kitchen garden there, it will not work. And it will not work on the flooded, on the territories that were flooded as well. By during the time, the river, the water reservoir was there. It was very polluted. All this complex of Nikopol, Pokrov, Marganets, all these towns at the Soviet times when there were no environmental norms, the in the 70s, like the first beacon ship to the Earth Day, before the 70s there were no environmental norms. There was nothing. Starting from the 1970s, the world started thinking about it. Consequently, there were a lot of pesticides and a lot of sewage water, and it all would accumulate there. Kakhovka reservoir also had the biggest amount of dead water, so to say. So some amount of water is changing and some amount of water does not. And because of that, there was a lot of mud at the bottom, and it doesn't happen in the other water reservoirs. But since Kakhovka reservoir was really huge, it had a lot of it and a lot of contamination. And we can see from the satellite the situation there. And you know, it's a huge area, like 35,000 kilometers of this gray soil with mud that stays there, mud or slit. And there is also Holopristan and Oleshki settlements. They're also under this layer of slit. You will not be able to grow anything there, and I don't know what the state is going to do, because it will be deoccupied, and you will have to tell people that you cannot go back there. You can go back to Kherson, to Borislav. You can go back there, but you cannot plant anything, and it will be a huge tragedy. And it will be a huge consequence of war. After the last explosion of war, no one will die from this explosion. After the last mine will be taken away from the land, no one will die from the mine, but the slit with extremely polluted slit will stay there. And there are a lot of things, a lot of remnants of different substances. And now this huge territory, which looks like forest, it's great as a forest. But if you want to do something, like even using the wood from this forest, we have to keep in mind that it is a forest that grew on a very polluted land. Unfortunately, the analogy with Chernobyl is very close, because 40 years ago Chernobyl area was fields and villages, and it was well settled, and because the radiation doesn't let people to go back there and use this territory, the nature got restored. And also Polisa, it also got a lot of mud and slit, because people were not living there. Like, if you do not touch it, the nature is able to restore itself very quickly. But to go back to the life as it was before will not be possible. There was a fortress of the Parisian siege in Khortytsa Island, but they never lived there. They had families elsewhere. What is the Great Meadow? I repeated it many times, but I think you know. It's actually a word that stayed in the Ukrainian dictionary, but we don't use it anymore. So most of us were born in Soviet time. So meadow means grass near the water, which is getting flooded. It in the springtime, and also it's a big forest. So Great Meadow, it's a big forest that was flooded by the waters in the springtime. Um,
And we don't make mistakes. We didn't make a mistake there, but it was actually a forest. And the landscape actually remained where you could fish, where you could hunt, where families of those residents of those villages had the Zaporizhia siege fortress. And actually, it turned out that this was impossible to restore. It would be successful to rebuild the architecture there, but not live there. I have a very quick question. Looking for some environmental artistic projects today, I saw this one project in Colorado. I think they planted some plants there. There was an area with heavy metals. This project has been going on for 30 years or so. There are some positive results. Like there are plants that help the soil restore. Yes, this is called phytoremediation. When plants grow, they improve the landscape. It's not that it's like very effective, but indeed some types of plants are better at storing some chemical elements, and that's also a way you could fight against heavy metals. This is about horizon. We all want to get a response from you, whether people will come back there again after this territory started restoring. We didn't expect that, but I cannot say anything now because we don't know. This can happen as well. By the way, willows are also quite good at storing chemicals. A lot of people want to study something there. We also take samples like everyone. Just our samples went to London, and there was this very difficult situation. We were waiting for half a year, then these samples were returned because of a wrong zip code, and this is an interesting story about quite a sad thing, because 6 heavy metals are over the permissible concentration, up to 17 times to over 40 times. That's a lot. How do we take samples? Who will be allowed there? Something was taken during those several expeditions. There were 6 of them, and of course there are wonderful articles by Linus Truk on LB that are called the Willow Sea and the Willow Sea 2, but it just describes these expeditions really well. The expeditions took place for like a few minutes. A few cars came in, people would set up, people would start collecting something. In 10 minutes a drone would show up. So at minute 15 everyone is just taking their stuff and leaving. All participants were wearing helmets and bulletproof vests, so it's not romantic at all. Something was collected next to the shore, something was collected by the military, but it was always very rushed. And we were able to understand that from one of the samples that at the depth of 35 centimeters and more below, the concentration of dangerous chemicals really grows, but we haven't been able to collect more samples like that. You need to collect them in the right location. And turns out that if at the depth of 35 centimeters the concentration is growing, we are not ready to say how deep the pollution goes. But in any case, there are various technologies. Maybe after a while the soil will be restoring itself. Maybe we can grow something that is not consumed as food. Like if we make some small town with flower beds. This is just an example that nobody's going to eat. Can I make a comment right away, please? Yeah, the focus is that definitely not in our lifetime. The territories where we had the water reservoir and flooding, we definitely won't be able to grow food in our lifetime. But until recently, the world didn't need to develop the methodology of this phytoremediation. This, so to speak, generous reason to develop these methodologies never existed. Like, if it happens, it will happen here. Can I just interfere? We have a situation when a forest is the best thing that can happen to these territories for a long time. Yeah. First, this is the best thing in terms of it being natural. Like, nobody made the decision to create a forest. Nature did not ask us to make a forest. It just recreated naturally what was supposed to be there in the first place in this ecosystem, in these natural and climatic conditions. And I wanted to add another thing. I heard this really nice phrase about the steppe, but I like a different one, but not about Kherson region. I'm from the Kiev Oblast, and I used to think that in the south of Ukraine there were only sunflowers, and the east of Ukraine there were only sand hills. And it is slightly true, but not entirely. And the first time was in a steppe, it was in Luhansk Oblast, and my colleague brought me there. It was in 2006. We were talking on the way. At a certain point, he said, "Shut up and look straight. You see a steppe. The steppe is the only place on land, not in the sea, where you can see everything the same all the way to the horizon." And I really liked it. I never heard it before. So the Great Meadow is actually the second place, not just in Ukraine, but in Europe, where it's possible. Europe is so heavily built over that now it is one of the few places where you can see the horizon. Actually, a lot of countries in the world are moving to that. Yes, it's about space. It's not about watermelons. And we can use that, but we need to come up with a certain tricky idea. But let us make a bridge to Andrei. It's great when discussion works without a moderator. It means it's working. Why are we so stuck up on use by a person growing something on the territory of the Great Meadow? Why are we talking about this? If we look at satellite images of Kherson Oblast, we will see a very small percentage of arable land. There are 20% of the population living in Kherson itself, and there are a lot of territories where previously we had fewer people because they were doing agriculture. These territories are much more feasible to rebuild because there is infrastructure, there are roads. You don't need to dry the swamps in the Great Meadow to restore these territories. The issue of recovery in itself, just like the culture, is oriented towards the human. The human is the main economic, environmental, and cultural indicator of the baseline for designing and construction. Any recovery is focusing on people and their needs and where they live. And only then do we think about the economics. What do we do more efficiently, what can be done in a better way, what cultural project will work for these people. So the Great Meadow, you know, after many years, even after the end of the Iron conflict, will remain the Great Meadow. And we are going to have to look at it that way for a long time. Just leave it alone. Look, a wonderful conversation. I think I really focused on the idea expressed by Oxy that in certain cities you won't be able to interact with nature. But I am imagining that if you take my parents to their old place, they will want to plant things. They will want to dig a well. Like, it's difficult to fight against the tradition to burn the grass. Look, this is not the only war in the world. The entire history of humankind is built on wars, and these strategies are already developed. There is nothing new we can invent here. But this is a really difficult subject because people are used to working on land. Because when you take people to barracks, it's a tragedy. This will not go anywhere. That's why war is so bad, because the post-war years will be very difficult. One thing that is slightly soothing is that destruction of that scale brings back nature, and that's maybe the one good outcome. And if we look at all the documents and thoughts around restoring the water reservoir, why is the government not considering modern methods? Because why? Because great construction is about large budgets that will go in different directions. That's very clear. And it's upsetting that there is a certain decision already made. It is still in discussion. The war is still going. Yes, it is actually strange to talk about this, but there are some projects there, projects that are bad for the Great Meadow, bad for us in the long term, because this is a new stage of ecocide. It's very difficult to explain. Because when you are outside, when you are asked about this at some conferences, you start talking about this forest. This is a phenomenon for Europeans that feels very optimistic to them. And coming back to the tragedy, people will live it as a tragedy of their everyday life. And this entire humanitarian sector, we are always humanists, we always focus on people, but the government is working in a slightly different way. And the recovery will be a very harsh ordeal for everyone. I think we need to prepare people for this. And there was this idea stated there that everyone is waiting for the end of the war, and then people will suddenly learn they cannot come back, and we need to prepare people for this. Yeah, it's really important to explain here that we think that the end of the war is coming back to the starting point. I don't think people are that naive now. I mean, it's a dream. People want to go back to their past life and develop it the way it started from. But we have a big audience of people from Kherson. Maybe there are some thoughts that you want to share with the speakers. Maybe you want to say something. Please go ahead. We have 15 minutes for this.
Ви хочете щось сказати? Будь ласка, в нас є для цього 15 хвилин. Давайте, я не знаю, чи можна сюди носити мікрофон, а ви з голосу.
And everyone agrees that if the left bank remains occupied, I mentioned this in my public presentations, in my public materials. This was voiced at many conferences. If the left bank remains occupied, the Kherson region, in the 26% of the territory that is deoccupied, as an economic and administrative entity in Ukraine, it makes no sense. So we have to make a decision, a constitutional decision by the parliament. We need to join this part of Kherson region to the Mykolaiv region and to join the other part with Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, and that's where we can develop heritage, because otherwise not administratively feasible, because in the small part where we have the infrastructure of Kherson region, it is ineffective, and we need to speak about it publicly. Thank you. Let's keep the microphone there because we need the microphone for interpretation. Do you have comments on what has been said? Again, this is a question that comes back to the end of the armed conflict. If we look at these two options, the fortress city can exist if it is not in constant under constant siege, and if things go on as they stand, Kherson will remain a fortress city. But in terms of culture, of destruction, this is possible only if we recognize the occupation. That is a very difficult subject. And in the context of this uncertainty, I would not make clear-cut conclusions of what is going to happen, because this is based on the format of the end of the war. And here we need to allow for this uncertainty to exist. We have a few minutes, so if our conversation here inspired someone and you would like to share something, please do. Please use the microphone because we have interpretation, and please introduce yourself so we can know who you are. My name is Alana Novetska. I work in the National Historic Library of Ukraine, where we have been collecting materials that you mentioned. And when the war started, we started collecting information strikes on every region. It's now available on our website. You can look at those collections of materials that were created by correspondents, by journalists. You can see testimony we were able to collect. And now I am sitting and listening about our region, and our library has materials on the localities that you mentioned. I really recommend, if you are saying that you are collecting an archive, in the Soviet period there was this big edition, History of Cities and Villages, in 26 books edited by Dmitro Tomko, and we are collecting these materials still. I really recommend that every region, including Kherson region, should publish this material, including all these publications. This would be really helpful to all our future generations. Where can we turn about this? We can support you. We are ready to support you because our library is an all-Ukraine center for the collection of local history and local studies. Every day we collect information about lost items, and I would be happy if we could work with you so that we can share those materials with you. We are very proud of this. Thank you. Maybe one more comment. Just one sentence, but it was encouraged by the previous comments. Roman urged us to share stories about mosaics, and I will speak about cotton. This is slightly different from what my grandma said, who was collecting cotton. It was before the Second World War. She was a teenager, and after decolonization, she was walking in fields where it was all grown, and it was just a slight drop in the general mosaic. So in the general concept of Kherson as a fortress city, a lot depends on what the left bank will be like, when and how it will be occupied, when it will come back. So I would not rush with eliminating the agency of Kherson Oblast. Yes, there are a lot of questions, managerial decisions, whether they're rational or not. But we are talking about the natural heritage, because we are working on the concept of a fortress city and how the left bank will be deoccupied. Of course, we are going to get not only tragedy, but when the left bank is deoccupied, we are going to have a big issue with natural and cultural heritage. I get a lot of information from relatives who remain there and do agriculture, among other things. There is an enormous human tragedy there as well, especially connected with children, but that's probably a topic for a different discussion. So we cannot abandon the concept of a fortress city, but we still need to handle the issue of the left bank. Thank you very much. I want to announce that our next panel is going to be dedicated to our reflection on the fortress city. Please stay with us. We are reaching the end of our panel, and to wrap up, you know, there is a psychological law that you remember things best that you heard at the beginning and at the end of a conversation. So I want to ask all three of our speakers to share one important thing that you want the audience to remember based on today's discussion. Please let me know if you're ready. This habit of every panel to make the speakers to make this final comment is annoying, but at the same time it's understandable, because I think we explained everything. And for me, it's important to speak about Kherson region that faced enormous challenges with lack of understanding as an agricultural area, as a Russian-loving area, and this change of narrative is so important for me, because I worked on this for years, as did my friends and colleagues, and now I hope that this exhibition, all these conversations, everything we do will be really important for those who didn't know Kherson region well, because it is a big, legendary, talented, symbolic land, really symbolic for Ukraine today. I actually think about this a lot, and actually Kherson today, maybe this is obvious, maybe this is an obvious story, but Kherson is a different city now, and in the future it will also be very different from what it is today. And we, residents of the city that it used to be, we can preserve it, we can share it, we can share this memory with a new city. and help the city to form its new identity. I think this is the biggest thing in the context of cultural heritage and Kherson itself. Yeah, I am a biologist. I can only speak about that. I want to remind you that apart from cultural heritage, Kherson region is very important in terms of natural heritage. There are 5 national parks and a natural reserve in the oblast, which is more than any other region, which is very different from the stereotype of watermelons and sunflowers. It is in this area where we have the biggest number of national parks and natural reserves. And also this region has the biggest number of plants that exist only here, nowhere else in the world. It was not in the Carpathians. The plants that exist there can be found only in this place, and this kind that is actually used on a coin. We were actually scared that a big part of the population was flooded. It is, you ask what it is, it's an animal. It's like a big rodent. They have no eyes. They live underground. They are similar to moles, and they live only in Kherson Oblast. It is the only place in the world where they exist. And despite everything that happened there, the floods, the problems, the animal persists. We can see that based on satellite images. And I want to say that during the time of this war, this kind became the first animal in the world that got a special protection status. In the International Book of Rare Breeds, it is mentioned directly that this breed is threatened directly due to the Russian war. Kherson Oblast has creatures that exist nowhere else in the world, and they got the highest protection status in the world, with clear reference to this being a result of Russia's actions in this territory. So I hope that this will, of course, lead to a restoration, because, like I said, nature doesn't wait for our decisions. It has enough wisdom of its own. But indeed, the region is very symbolic in terms of natural resources and in terms of natural symbolism. So the only thing we can do is hope that it will stay that way. We need to replace the watermelon with that animal, I think. Yeah, I actually wanted to say that branding is a fun subject, so let's come up with alternatives. But in 5 or 10 years, we will probably get sick of the mole as well. But it is normal, because these natural symbols will always make Kherson region quite different from other places. I have been listening to you with great enjoyment, and I was thinking, what are we talking about here? This is what makes Kherson region very tangible in practice, because nature always wins. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Because I was very happy to spend this hour and a half with you when the situation is better, and when Yulia will be able to say this is no longer a land of moles and watermelons. I will say that Achilles was running through these lands. Thank you. Thank you to the participants of this panel. We invite all of you to lunch. We have 1 hour for lunch, and at 1:30 we are going to meet up again for another 2 panels.